Hi friends, welcome back to the Biblical Monologue podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Flanagan, and it is summer and it is definitely cooking along here in Ohio. I haven't posted a video lately, and there's a reason for that. We are a busy family and life has just gotten crazy. And so I did want to share something with you all today. The video that you're about to see is from a women's summer studies series that our church does. Every year during the month of June, we do a 4-week Bible study as a women's group. We usually have a little booklet that comes with that, with homework assignments for you to do, like the 5 days leading up to the session, and then we get together and we have a session and we learn about a topic or a person in the Bible, and then the next week you do your 5 days of homework for the following week. This year our summer series was on the wives of the patriarchs, and it was called Wait on God, and it's about what not to do when you're waiting on God. So we studied the lives of Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Tamar, and it was a really interesting study. I had the privilege of speaking on our second week, so that was on Rebekah. It was such a privilege to be able to share and research her story and just learn about how things operated during that time period, and kind of just gain some understanding as to how this woman may have been thinking or feeling, and how she did live for God and how she did not choose to live for God. So I hope that you will take a minute and check out this video. And I also hope that you will check out the link below to view the other 3 weeks and listen to the other 3 speakers that shared during our Women's Summer series. It was, truthfully, it was so good, and it was very rewarding, and also just really, God really taught me a lot during this season of preparing for this. He just did a lot in my life, opened my eyes to ways that I have not been waiting on him. Things I've done where I've gone ahead, or I've tried to sort of manipulate the circumstances to make things go my way. He brought some things to mind, and so it was really good opportunity for me to just go back and ask him for forgiveness, number one, and realize that it's through him that we do anything and everything, right? So I hope that you'll enjoy this video. There will be a lot more content coming, and so I will see you all soon. I hope you're having a great summer. Okay, so I think we're ready to get started. Welcome back. Question for you, just out of curiosity, who got to do like 3 days of the homework? Wow, you guys. Okay, did anyone get all 5 days done? Oh my gosh, you guys get extra gold stars. That's amazing. That's awesome. Congrats. Hopefully it'll help, as it helped prepare you for tonight. Tonight we are going to talk about Rebekah, but first I'll introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle Flanagan, and I am married to Dave. I've been married to Dave for 28, almost 29 years. We have 3 sons. We have Andrew, who is 19, going through Columbus State for skilled trade. So he's keeping busy with that, working, doing all those college things, living at home, eating my food. This is how it goes. We all know this, right? And then we also have twins, Carter and Lucas, and they're all up there. Carter and Lucas are obviously fraternal, and they are as different as they look. I'm having issues. I'm not very techie with these things, so sorry. Yeah, so Carter, the one in the middle with the dog, is our introvert. He's happy, just chilling. He likes video games, helping his grandpa fix tractors. He works. Lucas is our athlete. He wants to do hockey, lacrosse. He's very social. He wants to do everything all the time. And then our dog, Maverick. So that's just a little bit about me, just to, kind of let you guys know who I am. So without further ado, we'll get started. Um, Tonight starts out with a love story. Who does not love a good love story? I'm a
Tap to edit.
rom-com freak, and I'm sure that if you guys like love stories, some of them have gotten so cheesy that it's really unbearable, but we all have our favorites, right? So tonight's passage starts out, it's just really a love story to begin with, between Rebekah and Isaac, and it's a God ordained love story. But I'm going to title this passage, this study, How to Age Gracefully, because as we look at Rebekah's life, we're going to see that things start out really great and then they just kind of slowly go downhill. And she doesn't really seem to have um, aged gracefully by the time we get to the end. So, we're going to pick up kind of where we left off last week with Abraham. And in Genesis 24, we're about 3 years after Sarah has died, and he buried her in a cave at the field at Machpelah. And if you remember from last week, what Janet told us, that this was the only piece of land that Abraham owned. So he's getting old. I mean, he was 100 when Isaac was born. And in this passage, he's 137, and Isaac is 37 years old. And the Lord made a covenant to him, right? He was going to multiply his descendants through Isaac. But we have a problem. Isaac does not have a wife. So this is where Abraham is going to step in and make sure that this covenant gets fulfilled. So, verse 1 reminds us that Abraham had been blessed in everything. And the original covenant that we talked about last week in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, if you don't remember, we'll read that. It said, "The Lord said to Abram, go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you." The covenant that God made with Abraham in Genesis involved God giving him land, making him into a great nation. So there's descendants. And but the covenant was supposed to take place where Abraham settled. So that was where this was all intended to take root. So Abraham is going to get this thing going. He's looking at things and he's like, okay, I'm not getting any younger, right? So who do you call when you need help with something? You call someone you can trust, right? Your best and closest friend, someone who knows everything about you, that you know that you can ask a lot of. That's what he does. He calls on his faithful servant Eliezer. He was the elder of Abraham's household and managed everything he owned. In these passages, the servant's name is never mentioned, but in Genesis 15:2, Abraham's servant is mentioned as being Eliezer, and it says, "But Abraham said, Lord God, what can you give me since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" So at this point, if given that the servant is Eliezer, he would be about 85 years old. And if Isaac would not have come along, Eleazar would have inherited everything. So Eleazar has served faithfully to Abraham and to Isaac, knowing that he stood to gain no inheritance. So he calls his servant in. And we're going to pick up in Genesis 24, verse 2. It says, Abraham said to his servant, the elder of his household, who managed all he owned, place your hand under my thigh. Okay, let's stop right there. If you were able to do your homework last week, you may be having some thoughts about this whole thigh thing. So let's just clear that up. This was an oath that they were making, and the type of oath was said to be very solemn. So, if you were a servant and you agreed to place your hand under your master's thigh, you were acknowledging and pledging obedience to your master. So, that's what Abraham is asking of him here. Um, he asked his servant to swear by the Lord that he would not take a wife for Isaac among the Canaanite women. Now, at this point in time, Abraham probably had a pretty good reputation with the Canaanites. And he more than likely could have married Isaac off to one of the princes in the land, but he had seen the wickedness of the things that were going on around him, and he would not consider just taking the easy way out and marrying his son off to one of them. So he wanted to make sure that he was doing as the Lord had asked and following this covenant. So what he did was he asked his servant to go and find a wife from the land, from my family. Go and get and choose a wife from there. He was concerned with finding a woman of virtue that would not lead his son away from God. So he asked him to, you know, go to where I'm from, find a wife. And back in those days, it was customary for the father to find a wife for his son. We see that in Judges 14:2 with Samson, where it says he went back and told his father and his mother, I have seen a young Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. And marriage between cousins was also particularly common back then. But his servant wasn't dumb, right? He didn't want to bind himself to an oath he couldn't fulfill. So, what would he do if he goes all the way there and the woman refuses to come back with him? So he asks Abraham, well, should I take Isaac to her? And in verse 5, Abraham makes sure that his servant understands that Isaac is not to leave the land, because Abraham understood the covenant God made with him was to be through his descendants, and that the land they were living in was promised to them. So this is where the covenant would be fulfilled. So no to Isaac going with you, but don't worry. If the woman refuses to come with you, you will be free from the oath, he tells him. And he also ensured that this long journey would come with a promise that God would send his angel before him, and so that he would ensure that everything would work out. Abraham went to a lot of trouble to make sure that the covenant would be fulfilled in the right way. So the servant takes a large caravan and sets out to find a wife for his master's son. And it was like, not like, okay, 2 or 3 of my buddies. He had 10 camels. He had all kinds of riches and impressive things that he was taking with him. He had servants with him. And the journey was long. I mean, it was 500 miles from where they were to where Abraham's homeland was, and then they would have to turn around and come back. So they traveled to the city of Nahor, which is associated with 2 relatives of Abraham, his grandfather and his brother. And in the back of your book on page 30, I think it's 30, there is a map. So that shows the trek, and it was quite a journey. I cannot honestly imagine. So they arrive. They've made it. They travel all this way with all these things and all the camels and the people. And the servant, he gets right to work. He has the camels kneel by the well outside town in the evening when the women come out to draw water. And then the first thing he does is he prays. That stands out. He made an oath with his master who trusted God. He travels 500 miles, and then he shows the same trust by asking God for help. It's really astounding to think that. You think I'd be sitting down rubbing my feet or something. I mean, is there some water? I'm thirsty. Hungry, where's a good place to eat? No, he prays. He gets right to work. His prayers are purposeful and specific. In verse 14, he says, "Let the girl to whom I say, 'Please lower your water jug so that I may drink.' And who responds, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels also.' Let her be the one that you have appointed for your servant Isaac." So, first, he prayed for the practical need for a drink of water. Secondly, he prayed for a spiritual need and asking God to show him that she was the one. His requests were reasonable and possible. So, there was something interesting that he said in his prayer. And I read this like 50 times before it jumped out at me. But he said, "The one that you have appointed." Rebekah was appointed by God. Her story starts out with being hand selected for a special purpose. The truth is, you are hand selected or appointed for a special purpose. You may not see it in your everyday life. If you're a mom with young kids who feel so completely overwhelmed, you can't see through dirty breakfast dishes in your busy schedule to find purpose, I know how that feels. Or you could be a busy executive who is just constantly grinding out to meet deadlines, or a student who's studying all the time and trying to do well. And it's at the end of the day, it's like, well, there's purpose in that. But beyond that, sometimes it's hard to find that purpose, but it's truthfully there. You need to know that like Rebekah, you have been appointed by God. The servant, interestingly enough, never prayed for a beautiful woman to come out. He said nothing of her looks. Instead, he's looking for a woman who had good character qualities like kindness and a willingness to work hard, maybe, because any woman who would take on a task he asked had to be a woman of substance. God responds abundantly. This part I love. In verse 15, it says, "Before he had finished speaking, there was Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, coming with a jug on her shoulder." God answered his prayer before he was even done praying. The Bible tells us in verse 16 that she was also very beautiful and was a virgin. And there are only a handful of women that the Bible describes as beautiful. There is a reference in your book also on that on page 31. And all of the women that we're studying in this Bible study this summer are named in this, which is interesting. Like we see all these problems, but, these beautiful women. And so we think like, beauty is just so important these days, and we can get really caught up in our appearance. But as we saw with Sarah, and we'll learn with the others, that it's definitely not everything. So let's see what happens. Once Eleazar sees Rebekah, he's like, okay, let's let this thing play out, right? So he approaches her and he asks her for a drink of water, which is customary. She offers to give him a drink, but also offers to water his camels, which is not customary. And she offers to water them until they're satisfied. So let's talk about exactly what she offered to take on here. Watering camels was no easy task. One camel could drink up to 25 gallons of water. He had 10. So she signed herself up for a few hours worth of work right off the bat. So he just watches her in awe complete this task. Like, could this really be the one? Like, I just got here and I prayed for this, and here's this woman, and she's doing all these wonderful things. So the camels finish drinking. He, of course, finds out who she is. She's the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And so he offers her, he asks, "Do you have a place I can stay?" Of course, after watering all those camels, she's probably sweating to death. I can't imagine. And she's like, "Yes, yeah, I've got a place for you to stay." So then he offers her some jewelry, a gold ring, a couple of bracelets, which is a sign of the master that he represents. He so faithfully serves his master. And it's interesting because our lives are kind of like that jewelry in a way. They show people who we represent, Jesus. So he is really like coming out and showing this wonderful character to her. I mean, how could you turn that down, right? So, but we're also seeing some character qualities emerge in Rebekah. She's hardworking, she's kind, she's generous. So, of course, the first thing she does is she runs and tells her family everything that's happened. And her brother Laban runs out to greet the servant. And he was most likely the first to hear. And of course, he saw the jewelry she had been given. And he was, pretty impressed by that, like, hey, how can this work out for us? So Laban, it's like, it seems like he's kind of leading the family, even though her father is still alive. And he kind of had that shrewd businessman, approach. So he's very impressed with all this. And, he offers him a place to stay, hay for the camels, water for him and his servants to wash their feet. So now the servant gets his turn to explain while he's here. And so in verse 34 or verse 24, I'm sorry, I put the wrong thing in here. He gives his master honor. So we'll just say that. And he retells his story. And he says my master 22 times because he's just really wanting to make sure that they understand that he's there for his master and not for himself. And he knew that Rebekah's family's response would not be to him, but to his master. So the family believes that this is from the Lord, and they allow Rebekah to go. So the servant worships the Lord. He just worships the Lord. And then he gives the family gifts, silver and gold objects, and then some clothing for Rebekah and her brother and her mother as well, which would have been like a dowry. And so after they stay the night, he gets up. He's like, all right, let's roll. Time to get back. My mission is complete. God has been more than faithful. We got to go. And the family's like, oh, okay, great. How about she stays for about 10 days? And then you can go. He could have, been like, I'm kind of tired. We could use the rest. No problem. We'll stay. We'll visit. He doesn't do that. He is on mission for his master. He insists that they return at once since the Lord gave him success. So it just makes me think, how well do we stay on mission with what God has called us to do? Like that servant. As believers, it's always our task to reach others for Christ through our actions, our lives, our words. And sometimes we think we have time. I know I do, but the truth is we don't know how much time we have. So this quote by Donald Gray Barnhouse sums up kind of the way this can work. If the world does not succeed in persuading the believer to abide in the world, it will seek to delay his exit. When you decide to go with the Lord, the world will applaud your devotion, but will say, don't rush. Abide a few days, at least 10, and then go. So it's easy to get like off track with what, we're on mission for. But this servant is such a good example of, this is what I'm here for. I'm here for my master. We must go. So after all of that, the family says, let's ask Rebekah. And Rebekah agrees to go. So they give her a blessing and they send her along with her female servants to go. And she really is to be commended here because she shows that she accepts God's plan for her life, even though she has no idea what that's going to look like. She has no idea where she's going. I mean, that would be pretty scary. So she goes back with a servant. And in verse 62, Isaac is walking in the field in the evening, and he sees the camels coming. And this is the first mention of Isaac since he was rescued from death on the mountain. And the servant explains to Rebekah, who that is. And then after they arrive, he explains everything to Isaac. And Isaac took her into his mother's tent, and he married her, and he loved her, and he was comforted after his mother's death. And it's like this whole chapter is just these wonderful character qualities in both the servant and Rebekah. The servant is it's really astounding. The way his faithfulness and his persistence. And it just like going along with, the way that we represent Jesus. How can we be a faithful servant? What are the things that we can do to show the world the master that we represent? We can tell people about Jesus. We can acknowledge that Jesus is the heir of all things, like Isaac was the heir. We can be willing to leave where we are to follow Jesus, and that is not easy. And we cannot be afraid to press home the point of salvation because we just don't know how long we have. What a wonderful way to start a happy marriage, the end, right? And the rest is history, isn't that what they say? Well, we're going to find out that all that glitters is not gold. And we really have just gotten a glimpse into Rebekah's life. So now we're just going to summarize a few things here from chapter 25. And Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. We're not told Rebekah's age. Some scholars say that she was only 14, but we really don't know. We do know that she was barren for 20 years and that Isaac prayed on her behalf. I cannot imagine 20 years. I think last week Janet said Sarah was barren. Was it 25 years? That would be, I don't know. That would be so hard. So her husband prayed on her behalf, and the Lord was receptive to his prayer, and she became pregnant with twins. They fought in her womb, and she inquired of the Lord. Her pregnancy was uncomfortable, and I can relate to the twin pregnancy part, but I don't know what was really going on with hers because it sounds like she was getting really scared, that there was some stuff going on in there, and she didn't know what is happening to me, what's going on. So she inquired of the Lord, and we see her turn earnestly to God when these things are happening, and she doesn't know what to do. Who do we turn to when we're afraid? Do we fret? Do we go online and try to find the answer there? Or do we turn to God for help? It would be wiser, I know, for me if I would follow Rebekah in this and not be afraid to turn to God for help when we have no way of knowing what's going to happen. She didn't know what was going on. She did the right thing, though, and took her fears to the Lord. Psalm 34:4 says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and rescued me from all my fears. It doesn't say that he was rescued from his situation, but the psalmist is rescued from his fears. So God tells Rebekah that she has two nations in her womb. Two people groups will come from her and be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. The first baby was born, and he was red and hairy, so they named him Esau. The second baby came out, grasping Esau's heel with his hand, and they named him Jacob. This is a foreshadowing of the coming conflict of their two nations, Israel and Edom. The boys grew up, and Esau becomes a hunter, while Jacob is quiet and stayed at home. In Genesis 25:28, though, we start to see maybe some family problems emerging, where it says the parents show favoritism. Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for wild game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So they're not, exactly getting along, right? So they grow up and they're as different as night and day, and mom and dad have favorites. And so now we have a story about the birthright and how Jacob steals Esau's birthright. And this is in chapter 25. It says, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me have some of that red stew, for I'm exhausted. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So now we're going to jump ahead a little bit here, and the boys they're grown, and once again, famine comes along and causes the family to have to leave the land. And in chapter 26, verse 1, it says this is a different famine than the one that had occurred with Abraham and Sarah. So Isaac did as his father had done, and he went to the king of the Philistines. And he said, he was like, we're going to go down there and get some help. Now, we don't know if the twins were with them. We know that they're grown at this point, but they're not mentioned. So the Lord appears to Isaac, and he tells him to stay there, stay in Gerar, and live in the land that he would tell him about. And then he restates the original covenant, this time to Isaac, that he had made with Abraham. And this is in chapters 26, verse 1 through 3. The Lord ensures him that he will be with him and that he will give him and his offspring the land. And he says, I will confirm the oath that I swore to your father Abraham, in verse 3. The Lord tells him that because his father listened to him and kept his mandates, his commands, his instructions, he would carry forth this covenant with Isaac. And so you think, oh man, that's all right. We're doing this. We're going to stay here. God's going to take care of us however long he tells us. It's going to be great. We're going to live the way God wants us to, right? Nope. Look what happens next. Once again, we have a beautiful woman in a foreign land, and the men start to ask about Rebekah. Instead of leaning on the promises that the Lord gave him, Isaac fears for his own safety and tells her, say you're my sister. However, after quite some time living there, Isaac starts acting like a husband towards her again, and the king sees it. And so he confronts Isaac about this. And Isaac just tells him the truth. And the king says, this would have brought guilt on all of us if anyone would have slept with her. Somehow, though, it seems like when you read this, he's like really irritated. What is this you've done to us? One of the people could have easily slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us. And then it says, so Abimelech warned all the people, whoever harms this man or his wife will certainly be put to death. It's like it's so hard to understand that, but it's really just God protecting Isaac and Rebekah through this king. It seems like he would have said, get out, but he didn't. He ensured their safety. God is our provider and protector. We don't know what Rebekah was feeling during all of this. Isaac, however, did become very prosperous in that land, rich with herds and slaves, and he became so powerful, in fact, it tells us that the Philistines grew envious, and Abimelech orders them to leave. So they make their way to Beersheba, where they settle, and they make a peace treaty with Abimelech. This is all happening in the rest of Genesis chapter 26. So now we're going to move on forward some more years with this family. And we're going to see the real dysfunctional family here. Isaac is getting old now. We start out with Abraham being old, and now Isaac is old. And this at this point, you're just thinking, what in the world, how was this woman thinking and feeling? All the things she's done so far. She's left her homeland and married this man she didn't know. She's gone through 20 years of barrenness, and you know, she's had to, her husband lied and said, say you're my sister. I can't imagine like how that must feel. And we don't know. Because the story's mostly centered on Isaac and the promise that God has made with him. But when you consider all that she's gone through to this point, you can see where her circumstances might have caused her to become maybe bitter, or I don't know, it just maybe have changed some of the character qualities that we had seen earlier. And that it happens to us too. I mean, maybe, you know, you've gone through some things in your life that have caused you to not react in the same way that you would have when you were younger. But it's it's important to remember that even though it's so easy to like get caught up in those things and just kind of go with the flow, like I know I do, we don't know what our future holds. And we don't have control over a lot of things in our lives, like Rebekah didn't. But we do know that God would never abandon us. He doesn't always promise us that things are going to go just the way we think they should. Like your husband's going to be amazing to you and he's never going to lie and say, tell him you're my sister. We don't, she didn't have that guarantee, right? But we do know that Jesus will always be with us. And that's something that we can always count on. So now they're older. Isaac, is wanting to give his blessing before he dies. He's about 137 at this point. And commentators say that the twins were about 77. So they were no spring chickens, right? So Isaac has decided this blessing is going to Esau. He wants to give the blessing to the oldest son, despite what God had told Rebekah, that the older would serve the younger. He's like, I'm going to give it to Esau. So he calls Esau in and he says, hey, go hunt for me. Prepare me some of your delicious game so I can bless you. And typically when a blessing was given, then they would call the family together and then announce the blessing. But that's not what happened here. So Rebekah, as any good mother is, was within earshot. And she heard the whole conversation. And this is where she decides that she's going to, initiate her own plan to make sure that God's promise is fulfilled. So she takes advantage of a lot of things here.